All right, everybody, welcome to Senate Revenue Committee. This meeting will come to order. Judy, will you please call the roll?
Senator French,
Here.
Senator Ide,
Here.
Senator McEwen,
Here.
Senator Pappas,
Here.
Chairman Beitman.
Here. Okay. First bill up for our consideration today is Senate File 136, Property Tax Relief Assessment Rate Reduction, sponsored by Senator Beitman. That'd be me. So I'll go ahead and present the bill and then we'll open it up for public comment. This bill is a very straightforward bill. Back in the 1980s, when this section of law was broken out and allowed for the legislature to set these assessment rates, they were set and they haven't been touched since. So back in 1986, imagine what the fair market value of your home was back then and multiply that by 9.5%, and that would be your assessed value. Here we are in 2023 and we have fair market valuations that have gone through the roof. We have constituents clamoring for us to do something about it. To me, the easiest and quickest and fastest way to do something to get immediate relief to these people is simply to just lower that assessment rate from 9.5% down to whatever number we came on. You'll see in my bill on page 2, I lowered it to 7.5%. And how I got to that point was I've looked at the rate of increase above and beyond what the Craig forecasted for property tax revenue, and asked LSO Fiscal to give me the number, the percentage that we'd have to lower this down to make people whole from the last year over year rate. So the email I got back from them was the increase in assessment last year was 1.86 billion for ag, residential, and commercial property, the all other class. So that is it's an astounding year over year increase. So in order to get this done and done quickly, I just lowered the rate down to 7.5%. We certainly can debate that, but it doesn't cut into the tax revenues that the state has been used to. The trajectory is still going up, but we're just taking out that huge blip in the trajectory and giving that back to the people. So with that is the genesis of the bill, the explanation of the bill, and I will invite any agency folks that want to come up and testify to come on up and speak on or against this bill. Are there anybody from the agencies that wish to testify? Okay, anybody from the general public or any of our favorite lobbyists want to come up and testify on this bill? Come on up, Mr. Moline. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this bill, reducing that from 9.5 to 11, or from 9.5 down to 7.5, hits my members very positively. As you know, agricultural land is based on the productive value, but we still have a lot of property that is in all of our houses or under residential. So by lowering this assessment rate is very positive for my members in the agricultural industry. With that, sir, I would sit for any questions.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Mr. Moline. Anybody else?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the
afternoon.
committee. Hopefully I fall into that category of one of your favorite lobbyists.
Of course.
We'll let you.
Depends on
Depends on
how
my
this goes, sir. No, just kidding.
Mr.
Welcome.
Chairman, members of the committee, Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. As I indicated in my testimony last week, this concept is constitutional. Certainly within the realm of things that you can do. I will likely be a bit of a broken record today here in saying that we are opposed to this particular provision. Again, I want to reiterate what I also said last week, that we want to be a productive partner with you in trying to find the appropriate relief here. I will say that one of the points of opposition is that only recently, during the last couple of years, we were talking about whether we shouldn't increase this assessment percentage because of our fiscal situation, and this would provide a pretty significant decrease, as the fiscal note suggests, over $160 million. And I think the chairman's right. It would perhaps address that blip, but it addresses it permanently and will have an effect when assessments come back down, which they're already beginning to do. And we will see that this coming year. So how do we find a replacement for the revenue that's captured here? Represents at a minimum a 21% decrease over the current assessment ratio. For local governments, the counties that I represent, that's $29.4 million per year less that would be available to them under this proposal. It has the effect of potentially shifting the burden to other taxpayers that we have, other classifications, the industrial, the mineral classification. So that's certainly a concern for my members. It's not to say we shouldn't talk about this, because it again is one of those constitutional elements and is worthy of consideration. This is a 2% reduction from the current rate. Maybe there's some other mechanism. Maybe there's a mechanism that it goes up in certain situations or it comes down in certain situations. I don't have that particular solution for you, because this topic really didn't get a whole lot of attention during the interim, despite it was one of the options available and constitutional. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to stand for questions, but it is one of those that we're opposed in its current form.
Thank you, Mr. Reamon. Looks like Senator French has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, and I'm not a mathematician, but I know in our county, the valuations went some places through the roof, 60, 80%. Most people in the county, 20, 25%, and is potentially going to do the same thing again. So my question is, with this reduction from 9.5 to 7.5, aren't you still going to get the same money or more if your valuation jumps 50% at 7.5? Aren't you going to end up with the same money or more with these increases?
Mr. Reamon?
Mr. Chairman, I've not been able to do that sort of analysis, Senator. I certainly think that that's a worthy analysis. It sounds like the chairman was attempting to do that. But you have to also remember that when it comes down, you're going to see a corresponding decrease of a sufficient amount. Yes, there have been some counties that have seen incredible increases. I'm not disputing that fact, and we need to find a targeted relief for those particular individuals that need it. But this will have a permanent, lasting impact in terms of its revenue generation potential for all entities, whether that's counties, school districts, the others, that goes well beyond just this blip that we're in right now.
Senator McEwen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you give us an estimate statewide on what the reserves in the counties are right now? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Reamon?
Mr. Chairman, Senator McEwen, I don't have that figure. Obviously, that would come out in the reporting. I suspect on average for most counties, it's less than $15 million in reserves. There are certain counties, your county being one of those, that have significantly more. We're not unlike the state in terms of some of that generation. And you know, those entities are trying to find new ways to use that as a generation so that we can see perhaps some reduction in taxes elsewhere. That was why Amendment A this last year was really important to us to effectuate that. So Senator, I don't have that at my disposal immediately. I'll see if I can obtain something to that effect.
Senator Ide?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. You made a comment on how, industrial and minerals would potentially have to pick up the slack on all other property, which is ag and commercial and residential. Could you explain that a little bit? Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, just imagine that you got rid of $2 billion worth of assessed valuation, or $160 million from our revenue equation. Somebody has to pick that up to continue to maintain services at an even level. And I appreciate that. I think the chairman is trying to say, hey, we're just trying to remove the excess of the last couple of years. But again, these things come back down. And this is decreasing the amount of revenue that can be generated out of the all other class. And so that slack has to be picked up somewhere else, assuming that they can pick it up, because minerals go up and down. And I can provide charts to that effect. I'm happy to provide a copy of a presentation that I gave this morning to the group that convened around this to show what those effects are. I'm happy to do it here, but I don't want to hog the time of the committee either.
Thanks, Terry. Any more questions? I have just one kind of an observation and a question. So that part of that presentation, you did give us some good numbers from 2019 to 2022. And I totaled up for the residential and all other category, the assessed valuations in 2019 were totaled $7,812,802,000 and change. 2022, the total was $10,608,181,000 and change, for an increase of 2.8 roughly billion dollars, a 36% increase in 3 years. My bill, as you mentioned, does decrease that rate by 21%. So there's a 15% that the counties will still get to keep in that excess. You're still opposed to that, even though you're keeping that 15% difference. We're not taking all that money back. We're just giving the money back to some of that money back to the people. Your response.
Chairman, so in terms of assessed valuations for the all other category, in 2019, that category was just over 7.8 billion. That grew to 8.1 billion in 2020, 8.7 billion in 2021, and 10.6 billion in 2022. I get what you're saying in terms of that decrease, but what I'm also trying to convey to you is that the change you're making here is not a one-time change. It is a permanent change that you're making. So if let's assume we went back down to 2019 totals on assessed evaluation for the all other category, we would be applying the 7.5% rate to that amount, which is a considerable decrease over existing budgets as they are today.
But I would also advise, though, that it's not permanent. It's for the 67th legislature. That would be a policy decision we would make, and the 68th could come in and undo that. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is entirely a policy decision that you could make. You could make that change in this particular legislation. If you wanted to make it a one-time change in the assessment, that's possible. But as you also stated, this hasn't changed from the 9.5% since the 1988 or 1989 legislative session.
Did you have Senator McEwen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we have any instances statewide where property values have dropped off a great deal? And I don't mean by community, because we could talk about Jeffrey City and places like that all day long. I mean statewide. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Reedman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator McCune, yes, and I will speak in county terms because that's who I represent. We have counties that go down on an annual basis. I don't have the numbers right in front of me immediately, but York County is one example that in the last 5 or so years did have a negative assessment from its previous assessment. After the 2008 recession, I believe every county had a negative decrease. So it does happen, and it happens all over the state at the county level.
Any further questions? Thank you, sir. Who's next? Who wishes to testify? Ms. Henson, you want to come on up? Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue. Due to the fact that a lot of the numbers that you receive related to property taxation come from our annual report at the Department of Revenue, I think it's important to just kind of lay the background. Obviously, we have no policy decision on this. This is under the purview of the legislature. But for example, looking at that 2019, those numbers compared to 2022, that also includes all of the new construction from 2019 to 2022. So it isn't and should not be interpreted that the property that we've got on the tax rolls in 2019 is the only thing that's reflected in that 2022 report. For some of the other property tax relief, I thought it might be of interest. We've gone ahead and calculated the 2022 median residential property tax amounts for each of the 23 counties in preparation for the property tax refund program. And I just thought I'd let you know that we only have 6 counties that had an median average in excess of 21%. The rest of the counties for 2022, when you compare their median residential property tax bill to 2021, were less than a 21% increase. And we've got those numbers, and I would anticipate sharing that with the group, when we get to those bills that are looking at the property tax refund program. But with that, I just felt it was important to note that we have to understand what's in those numbers. The other part of that is commercial as part of that all other category. So we've seen significant investment in commercial industries across the state. Due to our tax policies in the state, we've got exemptions for sales tax related to data centers and manufacturing. Keep in mind, all of that investment, that's also included when you compare 2019 to 2022. Significant investment in some of these communities related to new construction over the last few years. So just wanted to make sure that the numbers are being interpreted appropriately, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you for that, Ms. Henson. I would just ask, is there a way for you guys to pull those numbers out from like the new construction numbers? Can you pull those out of there so we can compare apples to apples?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we don't have a way of pulling out. County assessors, when you're looking at residential, commercial, agricultural, they're just valuing all properties as they exist on January 1. In no calculation is done to say, oh, they finished the basement, or they added on, or they tore down a shed. So all we have are the numbers from one year to the next. And unfortunately, I can't give you that apples to apples.
Senator McEwen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm kind of going to ask you the same question a different way because I'm trying to figure it out. What would you say the overall increase? We say 6 counties increased 21%. And that's a fact, and it says something. But if the other 17 counties increased 18 to 20%, there's not much difference. So what I'd kind of like to know for a measurement is what was the increase in the aggregate statewide? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Henson?
Mr. Chairman, Senator McEwen, so they were anywhere from 5%, that would be in Niobrara County, 6% in Sweetwater County. And again, these numbers that I'm providing you are the median residential property tax bill. And then after 6%, then we jump to, let's see, 11% in Carbon, Converse. Let's see. And then we jump to 12, Fremont, 14, Natrona. Oh, we had 12 in Washakie, 15 in Weston. Again, I'll give you this report, but so you can see now that's in that 1 year. And this one is calculating a median residential tax bill. So I'm not talking about new construction or any of that. It's just looking at county treasurer's bills on residential property and calculating that median tax amount from 1 year to the next. So it pretty much gets rid of all those outliers that we talk about when we're, so I don't know if that answered your question specifically, and keep in mind, all of these values, these are countywide values. So the values specific to any particular taxing entity, each taxing entity can value or levy a mill on the properties within their boundaries. Some entities are mostly agricultural, residential. Some entities have a lot of commercial. So that makeup and the impact of the decisions and policies made by the legislature are going to have a different result for those taxing entities depending on what the makeup is of their tax base.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the answer. I want to ask you if you would agree with me question.
Oh, geez. Be careful, Mr. Senator.
As we look at this, and the chairman brought up that this is a fix for now, and it could be fixed later should everything drop off. But from the overall numbers I've heard, and given the current situation of the economy, this could be the right time to do this. And if we go off the ledge in 2 years, we can always raise it back up to 9.5. And I'm kind of asking you if you agree with me with that statement.
Ms.
Mr.
Henson?
Chairman, Senator McEwen, what I would state is that reducing the level of assessment impacts every property owner in that all or other category. Doesn't matter if I built new construction, doesn't matter if I bought a lot of computer equipment for my business. I'm going to get a benefit for the most part because of our mandatory mills for education, the 25, the 12, the 6, those are the 43 mills, which comprise the majority of our tax base. Those folks are going to see approximately a 21% decrease in their property taxes. Now, the only time that situation would not be applicable and where they'll have to pick up some of that is for any of your entities that have bonds. So if I've got school districts, I've got community colleges, I've got fire districts, improvement districts, they have, by the vote of the people, borrowed money, and they have a principal payment. The way you calculate the mill levy in those situations is principal and interest divided by the total assessed value calculates a mill levy. So anytime you remove taxable value, you spread that burden on the value that is taxable. For example, even those entities that a commercial business owner, if they happen to be in Laramie County Community College boundaries, they're going to see if that assessed value is reduced based on 7.5%. What they might see in turn is the mill levy for the community college in order to pay back the bond and interest to be increased. We won't know the impacts of that until we know total assessed value and what that calculation is. And that typically only occurs when you've got when you've got loans that you have to repay. But that, I always feel that it's important to be transparent so that you as a body have all the information at hand when you make decisions. But in general, because of our mandatory mills, if you reduce the taxable value, that taxpayer is going to pay less in tax.
Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe you stated, correct me if I'm wrong, that those entities would, their whatever, monies would drop by 21%. That would only be in the 6 counties where 21%, it'd be everybody.
Ms.
Mr.
Henson.
Chairman, Senator French, it
Yeah.
will be everyone, because everyone will.
From the 9.5
Their
to the
taxable-
7.5.
I've mentioned
Yes.
historically that we're what's considered a fractional assessment state. So when we have 11.5% on industrial properties and 9.5% on all others, what we've essentially done is exempt the other valuation from taxation. So when you reduce the level of assessment from 9.5 to 7.5, that's taxable value that is no longer there anymore. And let's say we've got counties where the appraised value of my property went up 5% from one year to the next. With a reduced level of assessment, I will definitely be paying less in property taxes next year, which is then distributed to the entities.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yes, Senator Ryan.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned 43 mills. That all goes to schools essentially, whether it's K through 12 and community college. My question, I guess, is we have the highest cost, one of the highest costs per capita in the nation on our spending per student. And what I don't understand, I guess, is that where everybody's afraid to suffer the pain is we won't have those funds if we lower these taxes for our schools? And what percentage is that 43 mills of the total? Thank you.
Ms. Henson.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, so just for clarification, the 43 mills consists of the 12 mills to the school foundation, the 25 mills to the school district, and then the 6 county mills that are assessed. So that is just K through 12. I've not included the community college mills or bond or BOCES, or I'm just talking about the basic education mills that every property owner in the state of Wyoming pays. So related to that, and I am absolutely not an expert on education funding, but we know that there's a component of the school foundation and them providing funding for school districts that can't on their own with assessed value pay the cost of education. We also know that there are recapture districts that basically those taxpayers are paying the school foundation mills, but perhaps their school districts are not seeing a benefit from that. Those dollars are moving around. We talk about the state of Wyoming and funding education as a state and not specific to just a location. So it does get a little cloudy in the weeds. But I would say that we have mineral valuation tied into our assessed values. This bill ensures that those tax dollars are not impacted because we're only talking about that all other category. So industrial properties are still going to be at 11.5%. Mineral taxation is still going to be at 100%. And so those won't be impacted. But what I will say is that if there are bonds and things like that, how they will be impacted is if we have to increase the mill levy because our assessed value has been reduced, they will have to pick up part of that cost because those mills are going to be applied to their values as well. So it's just what you do to one side will always have an impact on the other side. But I do believe that unlike when, let's say, a county decides to reduce their 12 mills to 10 mills or 11 mills. What they do at that point is they leave all of the money that could be generated by minerals, industrial, and the all other category on the table. This approach eliminates that concern. So there are some positive aspects to adjusting the level of assessment.
Ms. Henson, before I let you go, I don't want to rat you out, but you have been doing this a long time. I won't say how long, but it'll blow people's minds how long Ms. Henson has been doing this tax stuff. Have you seen in your time in doing all this, a time frame like this, such as, you know, you're seeing a $2.8 billion increase in assessed valuations for the residential and all other category in a 3-year time frame? Have you seen anything like this in your time frame or in your time doing tax stuff?
Mr. Chairman, I have not. But what I haven't also seen is the inflation that is there. And inflation is impacting everything we do. The cost of materials, the cost of labor, the cost of lumber. And that is being reflected in some of these increases in values. And so, but not only does it impact residential property owners and, you know, what our values are on our houses, but it also impacts what it costs to provide services. So we're in quite a quandary here. We really are. We're in a situation where everything costs more. Taxes have gone up because of inflation. The cost of paving roads, asphalt, that's gone up because of inflation. All of these things are impacting us. But I do think the key is, if we want to provide property tax relief to a specific population, that is definitely appropriate, and most states have some program like that. But I also want to make sure to point out that you're right. Next year, this bill would take effect January 1 of 2024. So it would not make an impact on 2023 taxes whatsoever. It would impact 2024 taxes. Would it happen just one time? Possibly. I would like the committee to consider that the legislature can change that level of assessment within the constrictions of the Constitution, that 4%. That could be something that is addressed on an annual basis. We could go down the path of really focusing on budget and perhaps changing this level of assessment on an annual basis within the constrictions of our Constitution, so that we're generating a similar dollar amount each year, if that's possible. So I think just because we've always done it at 9.5 and 11.5, does it always have to be that way? Absolutely not. And it is the beauty of your body meeting on an annual basis.
Thank you so much. Okay, more questions? We're all set. Thank you for
your
that.
time.
Appreciate it. Okay, any more testimony on, I don't even know the number of this bill. Senate File 136. Yeah. Come on up. Mr. Farmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. Just want to share with the committee a couple of things about school finance and how school finance is impacted by the legislation. I think the truth of the matter is we really don't know how this would impact school finance. There are 3 ways in which school finance would be impacted. So for school finance, the state calculates what's called a school foundation program guarantee. That means that there is an amount of money that the school district will be guaranteed under the state's formula. The state has an obligation, and so that obligation must be met one of 2 ways. One is either through local resource, or 2 is from resource from the state, an entitlement payment. So one of the ways that this will impact education is we have one district right now that is a recapture district that creates excess in its property values, and that excess is recaptured by the state and then redistributed to other school districts. So we would have some impact as the reduction of recapture from that one county. So we would reduce the amount of recapture that goes into the school foundation program. The second way that it potentially impacts districts is for what's known as their local resource. So the local resource is a portion of determining what that how to fund that guarantee. So as you were told about these 25 mills and these 6 mills, the local and the county mills that go toward education, there would be a reduction in local resource. So the local resource will go down, meaning that the state share potentially would go up to the degree that the guarantee is not met. And that's the third way, is that the 12 mills on the state side would be reduced. So it's very difficult to assess whether or not any of the excess or any of the end of the day impact to education. But in the realm of, so what if? So what if we do get to the point where schools now have less money? The result there is known as a structural deficit. A few years ago, we were talking about structural deficits. Remember, the state has the obligation to pay. And so to meet that structural deficit, the way that the state has right now is transfers from the LSRA. So if recapture is down a lot, these local resources are down, the state resources down, and the amount that goes into the school foundation program is not enough to capture what the state has to pay, then we would draw on LSRA in order to fund education. So I don't know what that's all going to look like. I think it's extremely complicated, but just wanted to be sure you understood that the impact to education is really in those 3 potential areas: reduction of recapture, reduction of local resource, and then reduction of state resource. At the end of the day, whether it pays the bill or not pays the bill, I think we're going to have to wait and see how that plays out. But Mr. Chairman, just wanted to be sure you understood as it applies to the school side, it is very, very complex and difficult to know what the impact will be ultimately.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Any questions for Mr. Farmer? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else wish to testify on Senate File 136? Judy, is there anybody on Zoom? Okay.
If the person on Zoom wants to testify, if they raise their hand, we would know.
So who's ever out there in Zoom land, if you want to testify, please raise your hand on Zoom, your virtual hand. If not, we will go ahead and close public comment. Okay, with that, public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure?
I move the bill.
Move to pass by McEwen, second by Ide. Committee, any amendments? Any discussion on the bill? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you just refresh me on that original number when you gave your presentation on the $168 million that we brought in, and was that in 2022?
So
186.
So the increase in assessment last year for the ag, residential, and commercial, the all other category that we're dealing with today, that increase was $1.868 billion.
1.68 billion in one
1 year.
one tax year. Thank you.
Okay. See no further discussion. Judy, will you call the roll, please?
Senator French,
Aye.
Senator Ide.
Aye.
Senator McEwen,
Aye.
Senator Pappas,
No.
Senator, Chairman Biteman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, there were 4 ayes and 1 no on Senate File 136.
Senate File 136 is passed the Revenue Committee, Senate Revenue Committee. Next bill up for our consideration is Senate Joint Resolution 12. It looks like we have the good Senator Dockstader here to walk us through his bill. Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Committee. I bring you this joint resolution, Senate Joint Resolution 12, Chairman and committee, over the summer, we were looking for several different solutions. As I'm sure you were feeling the same thing that I was feeling, and my cohorts from the other side of the building, and we were looking for solutions that made it so that went out in public after those tax notices were sent out, you'd almost want governor's security with you. It was a difficult time, and so we looked over several different possibilities, and good representative that retired out, he and I, this is one of them we came up with after we traveled over to meet with the Department of Revenue and with our county commissioners, and settled on this as one of the possible solutions. And folks, I think these solutions will probably be blended into something that's very usable by the time we're done with this, because there's a lot on the table. So Senate Joint Resolution 12 is providing for the assessment of residential real property as a separate property class for the purpose of taxation, providing for valuation of residential real property. Needs to be approved by 2/3 of the House and the Senate. And then it would move on to the voters for a decision there. And I'll come rather quickly to the point that we're going to be doing here, but under Article 15 and page 2, the minerals, they're not amended, industrial 11.5%. And what we're looking for is to create that flex in the property taxes. No adjustments to ag. So that's where you see that as the residential real property. Split that out so we have some flexibility to work with that. Why? Because if turn over to page 3, this is the meat of it, second paragraph. We're essentially keeping the property tax at 019 levels, and it wouldn't take effect until 2025, and it would be adjusted for inflation. And it also change after someone sold the property, the ownership would change. That's over on page 4, second paragraph. You have the legal definitions as well on page 4 in the first paragraph, but it would hold until it was sold again. And then the actual ballot statement is on the concluding page, page 5. And Mr. Chairman, committee members, I don't profess to be an expert in property taxes. Difficult subject, difficult topic, and that's why we traveled over to meet with good people from Revenue to try to sort this out. And this is one solution we bring to the table, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dockstader. I like the idea. I'm with you on pulling out the residential real property, because that just makes it easier. It gives the legislature a tool to, like we just talked about with that last bill, pulling a lever here to give relief, or if we have to raise it, if times are lean and the assessed valuations go down, we can adjust that very easily. So I like that idea. The new concept is with the locking in at the fair market value of land as of January 1st, 2019. Can you walk us through that thinking on that and the how that works going forward?
We put in the adjustment, Mr. Chairman, we put into the adjustment for the inflation, because we know that we're putting it in there, we have to have some flexibility, and that would come through the follow-up piece of legislation, because things are going to change. But one of the things I noticed when we were having people testify in one of the forums this summer is they seem to be agreeable if we hovered around that 2019 level.
Thank you. Any questions for Senator Dockstader? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Dockstader, I like the bill. The one thing I have trouble with, like you said, we've got a lot of tax bills to kind of sort through and see how they all weigh the scales on them. The one part I have trouble with on some of these bills is sort of carving out certain, just residential and leaving commercial separate from the way it was in the past. I know there's, a lot of Main Street folks, commercial, that, including myself, I'm a homeowner and a commercial property owner, and commercial got hit pretty hard as well with property tax increases. So just trying to look out for the other, segment of the all other property. And I don't know if you have any comments on that or not, but thank you.
Right, thank you,
Senator Doxter.
Mr. Chairman, appreciate that. I realize that everybody was hit by this. What we were trying to find is a solution for the actual residential people, because that's who they didn't have that discretionary income to deal with the changes that were coming. And I got notes and letters and people said, this is 30%. I got one that said 50% and I didn't understand it. It's residential. And I know it was tied in with the way we do things. I got a call at the close of the session last year from my commissioners, and they were in a panic. They said a old beat up double wide trailer on a little itty bitty lot in the northern part of our valley just sold for $675,000. And they says, do you know what's going to happen? I said, I know, you don't have to talk any further. I know what's going to happen. So that's why more of the focus was on residential, but I understand it's a bigger picture, open to amendments there. Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, Senator. We'll entertain some public testimony and we may get back to you with any more questions. Is there anybody from any of the agencies that wish to testify? Any agencies? Seeing none. General public comment? Come on up. Ms. Huxtable.
Mr. Chairman, Dixie Huxtable, Converse County Assessor, and I have with me my colleague from Sweetwater County. Our association has not taken a position on this bill. We have not met since this came out. We had talked about this concept at our meetings. When this bill come out, pulling the residential out is not a problem. So we're comfortable with that. The problem we have is administration of starting on page 3, when you're going back to a value of 2019. And if your house was built in 2019 and everything was fine, I can go back to that and then start adding additions to it if I have them all recorded in the year that they were added, so we know what cost table to use to appropriate apply to the addition. But what if there was not a plat, a subdivision that was created since 2019 and now, and maybe it's just vacant land? How do we establish that cost because it wasn't existing in 2019? And there's going to be some issues with those kinds of problems, something that wasn't there. If I'm reading this bill correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that starting in January 1st of 2025 is when this goes back. I'm presuming because it's got to go through the constitutional amendment and all that kind of stuff. But we're going to go back 6 years to what we had on the records and try to start with that base value and then add at cost only. And every year the cost tables change. So we would have to make sure that we're picking up the adjustments for the right year so we get the right cost, because that's all that's being allowed. And I'm presuming it would be the cost of that year that it was installed. Bear in mind, we also field check property once every 6 years. So we may not have been to that property or may have just been to that property. And so there could be significant changes. And then the taxpayer would have to explain to us, or we would have to understand, when did you build that new building? Was it in 20 or 22 or 23? So that we can get the right characteristics to go with the right cost table, to add the right value to get where we need to be for January 25. I just think there are a considerable amount of administration issues for the assessor to administer that part of this bill. And I would defer to any questions, and my colleague may have some additional comments.
Yeah, I would like to just commend the legislature. I'm Dave Debus, I'm the Sweetwater County Assessor, and I'm the president of the Assessors Association. But I would like to commend the legislature for trying to help the homeowners who are having an issue with their property tax. When we met recently, we met as an association, and we had the Department of Revenue, we had the State Board of Equalization, and we had a few legislators all in the same room and had a great conversation. And the first question we asked is, who are we trying to help? And the answer was basically the little old lady who was being taxed out of her home. And I think you, as a legislative body, heard that. You've instigated the property tax refund program again. You're looking at potentially a homestead exemption coming through again. And now you're talking about adjusting the assessment level. So you have taken those considerations and you're listening to your constituents, and I appreciate that. But this bill is not tax relief. This is tax reform. This is basically going to an acquisition value. You are actually mirroring something similar to Prop 13 out of California, which had huge consequences over a long period of time where tax revenue was dropped significantly, but other taxes had to be instituted to keep the same services provided for the constituents. So Ms. Huxtable got to the points where administration is going to be very complicated for us, but I think this may be just a little bit too far. I think you as a legislature have already addressed the problem, and this might be just, like I said, one notch too far in helping those taxpayers out.
Thank you, sir. Senator Pappas.
Yeah, I was concerned when I read this about the administration of it. Do the counties have enough manpower to be able to do the valuations, the adjustments and everything that's required in here? Is this going to require more manpower? If so, how much more? Is it just like 1 or 2 FTEs, or are we looking at a big effort?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, I would agree in the big effort category. I mean, until a lot of these questions can be answered and we don't necessarily know exactly what we're going to be required to do, we really can't answer that question. But just administratively, I mean, all the research that has to be done, I mean, I've got 26,000 parcels in Sweetwater County. Not all of those are improved, but that's where we would start. We would limit it to those ones that are improved and then go from there. And I'm trying to come up with a way to start this process, and I haven't come up with it yet.
Any more questions? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. You mentioned a notch too far. Would you explain that just a little bit? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, I think you as a legislative body have listened to your taxpayers. And again, I think funding the property tax refund program was the best instant solution. I think the homeowner's exemption that's coming, there's a few bills out there for that, is another great step. This, I think, is just jumping the gun. It's going too far because you're not helping anyway. You're changing the entire tax structure. You're changing everything, and as long as the policies that you put in place, if they're continued to be funded and they continue to be administered by the legislature, you're helping the taxpayers that need the help. Now, one of the questions, I have conversations with another assessor, and we argue all the time about this. There's an issue on the increases in property tax value. But when we had our discussions in Lander, it was to help the people that couldn't afford the increases. So you can have a 20, 30, 40% increase in your property tax, which I believe our system is fair currently, and you can afford to make that payment. We're trying to help the people that can't. And that's why I think the property tax refund program was the right tool at the right time, and to keep it funded helps those people that can't afford it. And when I argue with that other assessor, my point is there's a lot of people that can afford that increase, and that property is worth the dollar amount it's being taxed at. But we're trying to help the people that physically, on their income, cannot make that tax bill. And again, I think you've done it already. I think this goes too far.
Ms. Huxtable, you mentioned, you had some questions about the implementation of all this. Do you have any suggestions that would make it easier to implement an acquisition-based type system that aren't foreseen in this bill? Or are you still just going to stay neutral and see what happens to this bill?
Mr. Chairman, there was a lot of discussion about the acquisition. There's actually, I believe, a bill to do a study, to fund a study for that purpose. And we did offer input into the types of questions, the type of scenarios that need to be addressed in that study. I don't have that list in its entirety with me, but I can certainly get it to you from what the assessors felt were important to be a part of that acquisition study. In this bill specifically, one thing I failed to mention is on page 4, when it talks about transition to the new owner, when it's transferred to a new person, it shall be valued at the fair market value of the property on the date of the transfer. Is that the sale price, or is that the fair market value that the assessor had in their books? I think, and that just bears the question that my colleague, or the comment my colleague just made about one notch too far. We don't have this study done enough to answer all the questions. There's more questions to this bill than there are answers, and we don't want unintended consequences for anybody, specifically the taxpayers, that we can't administer fairly across the board to everybody. So I can sure get you some of the comments that we had about acquisition study, because we did have some input, and we're happy to share that.
Well, please do. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Senator Ide, yeah, ask away. That's what we're
Thank you,
here
Mr.
for.
Chairman. I would, your comment on this last situation where on the sale, when the property sells, I mean, I would argue to say that the fair market value is the price of the sale. Is that, would you see it that way?
Ms. Huxtable.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, normally I would, but I'm not sure that that's defined this way exactly. We don't use a sale to set a fair market value. There's court cases out there that doesn't allow us to do that. Now that's under the existing system, not under a new system. So until this goes into place and we have the legal logistics to go behind it, but as we are now, one sale does not make a market. So that was my question here. If we start all over with, yes, the sales price is, and then how do you define, is that a valid sale? Does it matter whether they sold it for $10 plus other consideration, or was it some kind of an exchange, or was it cash, open market? All those things that you understand go into a fair market value is not really clearly defined here, and probably needs to be.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much for your testimony. Really helps. Anybody else? It's like Jeremiah's coming and Ashley's coming. You both can come on up if you want to. We'll go ladies first, and we'll start with Ashley. Please introduce yourself to the committee.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Ashley Harpstreet. I'm the Executive Director for Wyoming Taxpayers Association. WTA is a 501c4 think tank with a 501c3 research arm. Our mission is to advocate for sound tax policy for a healthy Wyoming economy. Positions that we take are based on an analysis of the legislation against our cornerstones of taxation through our policy committee. Their recommendation is then forwarded on to our 20 board of directors for a decision. In the analysis, as I mentioned, we look at the 4 cornerstones. Is the tax justified? Is it equitable amongst taxpayers? Does the proposal create a stable revenue stream? And finally, is this transparent, visible, accountable, and auditable? Based off that criteria, Mr. Chairman, WTA opposes Senate Joint Resolution 12 for a constitutional amendment, property tax valuation, as it fails to be sound tax policy for the following reasons. It is not justified, as this will ultimately modify behavior. If implemented, this policy would discourage growth and cripple the free market. It will be a disincentive to relocate or update residential homes. It will decrease the stock of starter homes and other more affordable housing on the market. California is the only state that has implemented this type of policy, otherwise known as Prop 13. They are able to justify the decrease in revenue as they have the ability to backfill revenue with an income tax. When California passed Prop 13, they also changed the tax structure through other fees and taxes to pay for their cost of services. It is not equitable, as it will not impose equal and uniform liabilities upon similarly situated taxpayers as taxes similarly situated homeowners at different rates. This policy change introduces inequities and inefficiencies to property taxation, in which over time, due to the assessment limits, can be very extreme. This will penalize our younger, lower income homeowners, as property tax revenue will be generated from newer properties or those with improvements or resold. Also, it is inequitable because the tax will distort economic behavior, as reasons mentioned before. It is flat out discourages home improvements. This tax is not stable, as it further erodes the base and constrains the rate of growth. There are concerns for transparency. Just as our assessors said, it will depend on how the statute defines construction and improvements. Additionally, this will not be easy to understand, administer, or cost-effective to collect, as the shift will require an overhaul of the tax appraisal system. It will require DOR and local governments to reestablish assessment of residential property tax. Finally, I would like to note we are not in opposition of House Bill 100 acquisition value study, as we think this major policy decision and restructure of the tax system deserves further consideration and study. It is hard to compare what works in other states to what happens in Wyoming, as our tax structures are very different. If this is something the legislature would like to consider, we support beginning with a study. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Harpstreet? Senator Ide.
Just real quick, what was that House bill number for the
House Bill-
study?
Oh, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry,
Member
Mr.
Ide.
Chairman, yeah.
House Bill 100, and it's the property tax acquisition value study.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, now we'll turn it back to Mr. Reaman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Jeremiah Reaman, again, on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. We do oppose this legislation as well. The primary consideration is whether this is, even though it's a constitutional amendment, whether it also is unconstitutional for the primary reason of uniformity. This would establish different rates for different properties of like people. So my neighbor could have a different property tax rate than I myself might have under this particular legislation. We're also concerned that it might create the same 1980s situation that we found ourselves in that ended up in the Wyoming Supreme Court with courts telling us that we couldn't rely on a system that tied home values to a 1967 value. So we're concerned about that. Now, in relationship to the provision of removing the residential, we are monitoring that particular legislation out of the House. We're a little nervous about the implications of it, but we're interested in further conversation around it. So I want to say that's one piece that we're not as hard and fast against. I don't want to be a broken record relative to my testimony about the dependence of local governments, in particular counties, on residential property tax, so I won't get into that. But I will just add one other thing that dovetails with what Ms. Harpstreet just mentioned, and that is that one of the things that has been seen in other jurisdictions that have something similar to this is that it pushes young individuals that are looking to get into their starter home to new markets because generally it incentivizes those of us that have homes and have presumably lower tax rates to stay in our home and never improve them and want to stick with that rate rather than what the traditional American family might do of moving up into, from our starter home into our children's home and then into our retirement home. So that there's plenty of research out there about that potential implication of these sorts of models. We too are not opposed to the acquisition value study. It's never a bad thing to have conversations about these things and try and gather information, but at least as this one stands, we are in opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Reaman. Any questions? Okay, thank you, sir. Oh, boy. I recognize this old cowboy. Mr. Moline.
A moment, please, sir, to compose myself a little bit. I appreciate the actions. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. The stance I take on bills is determined not by my thoughts, but by members' thoughts, which are into policy. Having no policy dealing with acquisition value, I will not address that portion of this resolution. My members do have policy on having 3 tiers of property. We appreciate the simplicity of having just the 3 tiers. We do not want to add. We want to keep the 3 that we have, keep agriculture, residential and commercial in the any other, and not separate out residential from that. So with that statement, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any questions you or the committee may have for me.
Seeing none, you're getting off easy, Mr. Moline, today. But,
Appreciate you taking
can't
care of a
guarantee
man of my
that's-
vintage.
Yeah, can't guarantee that'll continue this session. All right. Any other public comment today on Senate Joint Resolution 12? Anybody on Zoom, Judy?
Again, we have one person on Zoom without their hand up. So if you would like to testify, please put your hand up.
All right.
No hand.
Okay. All right. With that, public comment is closed. Committee, what is your pleasure? Not all at once. I'll move the bill for discussion purposes. Okay. Committee, I think this bill addresses a lot of, I was on the campaign trail this summer, and acquisition value was very popular in my district. A lot of people were interested in that idea. I think it's something worthy of us to debate. I think it's something that people are interested in. And whether or not we're ready for it is another question, as we heard from the testimony prior about the work that's going to have to go into being able to implement this bill. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this? Senator Pappas?
Mr.
start
Chairman,
with
thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, this did come up in previous revenue committee in the interim. It came up too late. I think we discussed it at our Casper meeting a bit. It came up and it was very intriguing, and I'm very intrigued by the concept. But it was, it's a whole new animal for us. As you heard, it's revamping the whole system. And so frankly, with the bill that's coming to us, not being worked in an interim, and with a study looming out there to actually do that, I think that this bill is just not ready for prime time. And while I think we need to look at the concept of acquisition value, certainly a lot of people out in the state think it may be something we want to go to. Others have mentioned to me in the interim that no, we don't want to go there. But I don't know until we actually do that study and we have all the voices at the table. So I just think it's not ready for prime time.
Sir, anybody else want to comment? Senator Ide?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator said it well at the end of the table here. I like the bill, like I said earlier, but I like what Mr. Moline said there too. I like the 3 tiers of property. I think we get into the weeds by starting to try to carve certain ones out and make it more complicated. I'm actually more of a acquisition cost guy than putting caps on. So for that reason, I like the bill. But for the comments made that maybe it's not ready at this juncture without a study to see what all of that really means. So I'm probably, I hate to be a no vote on this, but there's parts of it that I really like and parts that I don't. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Judy, will you please call the roll?
Senator French,
No?
Senator Ide,
No.
Senator McEwen,
No.
Senator Pappas,
No,
Chairman Beitman.
Aye.
Aye.
Mhm.
So, Mr. Chairman, there were 4 noes and 1 aye on Senate Joint Resolution 12.
Senate Joint Resolution 12 has failed to pass the Senate Revenue Committee. The next bill up, it's 2:30 and we are due back to work. So with that, we're gonna have to lay back Senate File 110 and Senate File 101 to Thursday, unless there's somebody here that can't make it back Thursday that was gonna testify on this bill, or any of these bills for that matter. Okay, then we will go ahead and lay these back till Thursday's meeting. This meeting has been adjourned. Thank you.